Okay, so we are recording the future of coaching. Welcome to all of you who joined us today to talk about the future of coaching and where we see the industry going, where we see the profession going. So before we get started, a little bit about us. So Global IOC has a big area that is under development, which is our communities of practice. We believe that once people finish a coaching training program or a coaching development program, that they're left to fend for themselves, to figure out how to continue that education and what that might look like. And so we think that it's a way to build communities of practice with our why, our conversations. And we really do want these to be conversations. So we will put you in 2 or 3 breakout rooms to talk about what you're learning today, to sharpen your saw in thinking about what is the future of coaching, to think about how it impacts you, how it impacts you as a leader, if you are a leader, or how it will impact you coaching leaders, and how it might impact your organization. And hopefully, you will walk away with at least one tool or resource for your own growth and development. So use the Q&A to pose questions. Keep in mind that everybody can see your questions. And we will answer those questions during the breakout and at the end of the call. We're going to have one breakout session in the middle. And if for some reason we get a slew of questions, we will begin to post those questions at the LinkedIn page or at Global IOC in the Communities of Practice tab. So we will try to post them in both places. And definitely we'll have them at Global IOC. We want you to check out Global IOC because we're growing and stretching. And make sure to follow us on LinkedIn at Global IOC. So let's dig in. So what is the future of coaching? So about 12 years ago, the American Management Association made a prediction. And these were predictions that were going to go over a 10-year period. And so these were 2008 to 2018. And what they said was the need for coaching will continue to grow, and that executive coaching would mature as an industry because there were going to be more barriers to entry in terms of being able to become a coach. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing professional bodies like WABC, which is who we are affiliated with, and the International Coach Federation, the Association for Coaching, the EMCC, which is in Europe, and smaller ones. In Africa, we have Consura. Is that right? Am I saying Comensa? We have Comensa in South Africa. So we have some places that are more local, but we have the international bodies as well. As that happens, then training programs emerge from those, and that does create a barrier to entry where people are asking, where were you trained? Professional coaches will broaden options to all levels of managers. What's really cool about this is that that coaching used to be available to the senior vice presidents, maybe the vice presidents. And now we're seeing coaching panels and organizations that can address this at all levels. Peer and internal coaching will become more established. We're seeing organizations establishing internal coaching programs. And I think a really important focus is on peer coaching. When we say that we're coaching each other, and I watch people without any development coach each other, it can be a little bit dicey. It can be a little bit aggressive. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about PEA and NEA, and it can be a lot of NEA in that. And so we want to think about how we can teach these folks to be able to do the peer coaching. Matchmaking will expand, and this was a big one for AMA, and that they were saying that it's the match between the coach and the client that leads to the greatest success. Ironically, that's what my dissertation proved in 2006. I probably should write something up about that. So metrics, and we're going to be measuring. And so how are we going to measure both at the individual level and at the organizational level the success of coaching? We have to be really vigilant on that because most of the indicators for success of coaching revolve around the softer skills, and some organizations are looking for those harder data proven points. And so we've got to really dig in to think about how we can get to those data points. Oh my gosh, coaching will become more virtual. If they could have only predicted what we were going to go through in 2020. Coaching right now is almost exclusively virtual. But the great news is that we can coach on Zoom. So when we think about paying attention to the voice from a phone conversation to the what's going on for the individual, it's huge. And so we've really nailed the virtual coaching piece. There'll be more university academic opportunities. We haven't seen that as much, but we do have programs like ours that are really bridging the scholarship practitioner way of looking at coaching, and that some of the universities, particularly in the UK, are really looking at how to train coaches in that space. And some in the South Africa too, Zelda. I know that's going on. And then organizations, I'm sorry, I did that too quickly. Organizations are going to become savvier. And that's our responsibility as coaches, to help people understand what they're choosing when they make decisions about the buying coaching. So that took us to 2018, but there was also another conversation that was held in 2015 between ICF, the Conference Board, and the Sherpa Institute. Sherpa Institute and AMA, by the way. Sherpa Institute does a lot of surveying of coaching, as does ICF. And so what they see is coaching cascading through organizations, which aligns with managers receiving the coaching as well. It becomes strategic, which will give us opportunities for measurement. We start looking at it as a key leadership competencies. What does this mean for leaders and to be competent as a coach? That we develop those skills and that we have consistent measurement and delivery for those skills, and that culture. So it's not just training people on coaching, but to go deeper into the cultures. We use the Clutterbuck Megason material in thinking about where we are from nascent to embedded cultures. And so we help organizations think about becoming a culture in that way. That we will have centers of excellence that will determine what coaching excellence looks like. We haven't seen that so much in the United States, but we definitely see a little bit of that in Canada, Carol. And we also see it in the UK and maybe a little bit in South Africa. That we see coaching, mentoring, and supervision grow. And Ursula and I have been working on a module that talks about, that is a supervision module for internal coaching programs, because we believe that you have to look at coaching from a perspective of from a supervision, that it's not psychologically based, but it's learning based, and we're being eclectic with it, because we cannot teach non-clinicians to be clinicians from a clinical coaches from that perspective. So ours is a more non-clinical way of looking at it. Again, metrics, notice all caps. Metrics has to be part of our future. We have to figure out what we're delivering and how we're delivering it. And that coaches are going to leverage technology. Oh my gosh, again, if they could have predicted how we have gone from being toddlers when it comes to coaching, I'm speaking for myself here, to maybe into elementary school and maybe into middle school in terms of how we can leverage technology like we're doing today. And I will say that what has brought this conversation today together in terms of the future of coaching is looking at 4 thought leaders in coaching. We're looking at Clutterbuck, we're looking at Boyatzis, we're looking at Enzig, Hedy Enzig, and we're looking at Reinhard Stalter. And we're looking at these 4 because they're the ones that are showing up at international conferences. Now, interestingly enough, that international conferences now made it not only affordable, but available to all of us to be able to attend those. So there was a South African conference, there was the EMCC that went online, there and the AC, which is Association for Coaching, and the Institute of Coaching at Harvard had an amazing workshop where these folks were also talking, and we could had the opportunity to not only hear what they had to say, but to go into breakout rooms with them afterwards to talk personally with them about where they see the future of coaching. And so that was part of the drive to create this as our first webinar of the fall. So what's changing in coaching rather? The increasing VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguousness. Hedy Enzig talks proficiently about this in her book. global interconnections. Now we're interconnected. We've got Canadians, we've got South Africans, we've got folks from the UK, we've got folks from the US. So we have become a global interconnected group. We've become virtual. We create knowledge all the time. As you leave today, there will be a knowledge creation piece of what we do, and there will be a knowledge sharing piece of what we do. And so that just makes it bigger. There's a need for multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary success. And so as we coach teams within organizations, knowing how when one team has a piece of information that impacts another team and when that's not shared, that creates some challenges within the organization. And as we know, traditional solutions do not fit the emerging trends. So what's happening? So we're going to start today with the first two speakers that we heard this summer, and then we're going to go into a breakout, and then we'll come back to talk about the second two and have a coaching conversation. So one of my favorite practitioners and academic practitioners is Dr. David Clutterbuck. He has an article called The Liberated Coach, and he is suggesting that as we grow and as we develop, we move through stages of coaching. Zelda and I were just having a conversation about that. You learn the model. What does the model look like? You know, and how can I adapt my technique, and how do I control the conversation? And so many new coaches, when they're starting out, are concerned about, you know, how do I look? How am I going to grow in this space? And how do I apply this model? So I will tell you that we have integrated all of these spaces from core to our chartered program. So we do talk about models, but we want the coach to think about how that model fits for them, not necessarily this is how I always do it. So some people are groomed in specific ways of coaching, from NLP to Gestalt to whatever model you use. So Clutterbuck is saying, how do I use tools and techniques to move in and out of models? And then what's the process? What is the process that we look like? What does it look like? So we use a lot of intended change theory, which we'll talk about in a moment, from Dr. Boyatzis. So intended change theory is both a model and a process. So you guide the client through that process. But while you're guiding them, you're using certain techniques, you're using certain philosophies. So you're facilitating the conversation. When we get to managed eclectic, and our organization now calls this integrated eclectic, because we think it's a weaving, it's a fluidity. It's not you pick something off the shelf, you do it a little while and put it back. And then you do a model, then you bring in a process, and they bring in a philosophy. It's all interwoven. And so when we get to that integrated eclectic, we don't know what we don't know. We begin to coach someone, and we might start off with a model, which is intended change theory, and then we might start with a process. But as soon as you ask the first question in the process, you don't know where you're going to go until the answer emerges from the individual. So we want to think about that coaching practice is evolving. And folks that we're coaching are not looking for us to stay in a model or a process. And this is why. Our goal is to teach people to think about what's going on, to think differently. Many times previously in coaching, clients came to coaches for solutions. And we're going to talk about that today as well. Problem solving and solutions, and looking to the coach to guide the solution. And what we're seeing now is that we have to help our clients think about a range of solutions and then pick the one that best fits with their values and best fits with how they make meaning of their world. And we can't do that when we stay simply in a model or process-based coaching way of looking at our coaching practice. So the other thing that was really apparent this summer was Dr. Boyatzis talking about coaching to compassion. And so the Institute of Coaching had him on a singular session, and then they brought him back for the conference. And this man is amazing. He lives what he says. I have had personal experience with him, and he is very much a compassionate leader, coach, and he has a lot to share with us from the idea of compassionate versus compliance. And so he says that compassion has the impact on emotional intelligence and resonant relationships. So as leaders, as we're working with leaders around their emotional intelligence and their resonance, that compassion is what increases that. Sometimes we call that empathy when we're in the emotional intelligence space, but it's being able to be compassionate with where the person is what delivers that potential for movement. And then he has a theory called positive attractor and negative attractor, emotional attractors rather, that he's been working on for 30 years. And what he's been able to accomplish with this theory as medicine has become more available from a fMRI perspective is he's been able to do MRIs with individuals who were coached by in both a positive emotional attractor and a negative emotional attractor by the coach. And what he did was train coaches to ask questions from the positive emotional attractor and the negative emotional attractor. What stuck out for me in the research that was published is that the negative emotional attractor questions were the kinds of questions we ask every day. Questions like, what's your goal? How close are you to the goal? What's left? What do you have to do? What more do you have to do? And I think about this, as an individual that's done a lot of work with sales and sales coaches, that sometimes the salesperson walks into the office of the person they're about to sell to and asks them, what keeps you up at night? What are you most worried about? And because they want to put a solution into that worry, but what they're doing is shutting down the thinking. In the positive emotional attractor side, it's the side of our brain that lights up and is open to opportunity, possibilities, that feels charged up, that wants to move forward. The negative just kind of, I think of Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh. Oh my God, I got to do this, then I got to do that. There's a sense of feeling overwhelmed. The other thing is that in talking about compassion is that he has done a lot of research, Dr. Boyas has done a lot of research and work around leading to sustainable change. And he and Melvin Smith and another individual wrote a book called Helping People Change. And in this book, Helping People Change, it's referenced at our website. So if you want more information about what we're talking about today, there's a quick article that has all these references in it as well that you can go back and find the individuals. But that using the intended change theory is leading to sustainable change. So the focus on problems and goals loses effectiveness over time. And I think we see that when people are trying to, do something different, particularly in a work environment, we see how that can actually be a problem for them. So here we go. Here's the positive emotional attractor. So the difference is the parasympathetic nervous system wakes up and it's like excited and it's focusing on what I'm good at and I want to try something different and what could I experiment with, and I'm feeling connected to you as my coach. And this is the brain that's doing this work, okay? So this isn't just a person making a decision of I'm super excited because I want to be excited. I'm feeling it. It's happening from my brain. Conversely, in the negative emotional space, I start thinking about what's expected of me. I start to feel overwhelmed. What are my problems? What are my weaknesses? And so I don't even call weaknesses anymore. I call them growth edges, the gaps, where we can go. Those are growth edges. Those are opportunities. What should I be doing? Where is my performance? What are those actions that are expected? And if you're my coach and you're having that conversation with me, I'm finding it to be a little bit annoying and a little bit dissonant. So what I want to do now is I'm going to put you all in breakout sessions, and we're going to have two groups this morning, and I want you to answer one of the two questions. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes, and the questions are one or the other. So the question you're going to ask and answer rather is, what elements of PEA or NEA are currently present in your coaching? And how could you add more PEA into your conversations with clients? Or what level of the liberated coach are you currently? So are you really more aligned with models? Are you more aligned with processes? Are you more aligned with philosophies? Or have you begun to do the integrated eclectic, which I know some of you on the call are doing? So whatever the group chooses to address is what's going to be the challenge, or for the challenge for the group. So I'm going to put you in 2 groups right now. I'm going to get into the breakout room. I'm going to assign you to 2 rooms. Zelda, you don't have to go into a room. You can stay out with me since we're going to be talking about later on. I'm going to open all the rooms. Okay. So you're going into rooms. You've got your questions, PEA, NEA, or liberated coach integrated. I'm going to move Carol to room 2 because you didn't go to room 2. Wonder how that feels to be in a room and get yanked out. What do you think?
I think it's super, super relevant.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Listen, Ursula sent me an email saying,
welcome back. And of course, seeing some old friends and some new friends coming together. What did you talk about? Remember, I know each and every one of you, so I can call on you if you're not sharing at the level I need. So what did you talk about? Who wants to be first? Monty, go off of mute and tell us what you're thinking.
So we were talking about NAPEA, and we're talking about Natasha, for instance, and she can speak for herself. But if I could just quickly summarize, she's in a law firm, and in the law firm, they have a spectrum of age groups from baby boomers all the way to millennials and so on, and they have a very different way that they want communication to happen. So the older people want more directness. They feel that you're speaking in a very flowery way, in a flattery way. They want direct speech. But to keep the communication positive does not mean you are being silly and lighthearted with it. Is to find this balance to communicate in a very positive manner without having to feel as though you are being militant.
Yes.
To communicate in a way that's really positive, but not make the older people feel you're not directly enough.
Yeah.
It's interesting to find such a balance. And we wanted to hear what language you would put that into.
So here's what's interesting, okay? So in preparing for today, I was rereading Hetty's chapter that we're going to talk about in a moment. And Christy called out DISC. So there's definitely DISC language, okay? But here's what Hetty's talking about. And she's saying that as baby boomers, like we grew up with the greatest generation that was very authoritarian. Okay, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. But we as boomer parents were more nurturing and more caring and more relational with our children. So those children that are getting into the workforce now are expecting that relational piece. Even though they might be a high D, they still want that relational piece, right? So you've got to be careful in terms of filters, and it's really more about how we were raised as children and how our teachers taught us that really have an impact of our expectations. However, no matter what framework you put it into, Monty, we do know that when we elicit that fight or flight, which is that sympathetic NEA, it resonates with the person. I mean, depending on how they see it, they might have more of, they might be able to go, oh, that's what that is, or, oh no, there's the threat, I have a client I'm working with right now that feels like every time he talks to his boss, his job is threatened. But that's carryover from before thinking. It's not maybe happening right now because he's got a D boss talking to an I client, but it's the filter we take in. So good question. Who else wants to share?
Well, I could go on behalf of our group.
Yes.
So in our group, we had Amanda, Robert, and Joyce. And of course, there was not enough time. But we also discussed the whole PEA, NEA question. And I'll tell you some of the things we had in common is we all agreed that it starts with us as the coach taking the position of PEA. Okay. We also, coincidentally, we felt that when we're coaching our clients in a PEA space, like probably within like 6 sessions, what happens is because of our work together, they start playing in the PEA space themselves, right? So that's another finding. Then we started to talk, and this is Robert shared sort of the process, and we agreed with him, was getting to like the diagnostic phase, not starting at the diagnostic phase, going deep into the issues and what they're thinking before responding. And then the final step in the process is talking really about their feeling, right?
Wow.
Going deep into their feeling. I think that was, Robert, I probably messed that up, but it's that lingering, going deeper into their feelings.
I'm glad you used the word lingering because we're about to start there. Robert, quick comment, and then we'll dive into Stelter.
It was definitely Robert's wording.
It's to say that we started with listening. It's the listening and then getting into the thinking, the co-creation, the questions, stimulating the thinking, and then getting into responding. And then at the responding phase is a balancing of the PA with the NEA and getting to reality check. It's crafting and grounding the coaching in reality while you're holding the best version of the client, the dream aspiration, but grounded in reality. And then the feeling is the solidarity and finding that we empathetic and compassionate and allowing for the grieving, allowing for the feeling, allowing for the brokenness, allowing for the loss for the client, and being honest about the difficulty and the challenges that they're having and not minimizing it.
So thank you, Robert. And I didn't ask him to say that, but he's leading us right into both Hetty and Stelter. And when I start this conversation, I want you to remember that we have master coaches on this call. We have folks that are in the chartered program on this call, and we have brand new coaches. And so you're somewhere on the continuum of how you integrate and how you work with people, okay? So when you hear us saying things at a very high level at the end of one continuum, just remember it's your growth edge. It's where you can go. So Hetty says, I want to call her Heidi. Hetty says that the models for coaching are based on a stabilized world. The world is no longer stabilized, so we have to change our models and how we look at it. That there's a dislocation, there's a people and place that's called a dislocation, and that we have globalized awareness. As I've said a couple of times on this call, we've got people from all over the world having conversations about where we're going with coaching. We're available 24/7, there are blurred boundaries, and so now the folks that we're coaching in a business context might be feeling an invasion of privacy. That I have to respond, and even, I've heard some folks talk about how they're being watched from a computer software program in terms of what they do. So there is this, how does that build trust? How does that build PEA when we're observing what people are doing? So that is compliance, that's coaching to compliance. And she says what that does is create issues around power, authority, respect, and identity. And we as coaches have to dig in and help our clients think about where they are in those issues that are created by a VUCA world. So one of the things I really like about Heidi's work is she's talking about finding joy, believing in and actively contributing to purpose beyond oneself and one's own comfort. And I think Stelter is sharing the same thing when he talks about what do you value. So we're going to find this convergence of these two thought leaders who are talking to us about where they see coaching going. And so finding joy in that purpose of what you want to do, what you want to be. Heidi talks about 6 emergent patterns. Number 1, the millennials and how we're going to coach millennials. And it comes back to what I was talking to Monty about is like millennials want to be coached the way they were parented. And so if we're coaching from a more compliant style, and if their parents were more compassionate, then we're already going to have a dissonance, okay? At the conference this summer, they were talking about how hard it is to not parent millennials because millennials or even Gen Xers, as boomer coaches, how do we stay out of parenting to compassion and allow them to be who they can be, okay? She talks about women leaders and that women lead differently. Marshall Goldsmith and Sally Helgeson have a book called How Women Rise, because Marshall saw that in coaching leaders that they are different than they lead differently than men do. And that's really emerging now with the pandemic and some of the things that are happening. So we, when we get into what's your goal, what's the solution and moving forward, that isn't always resonant with women leaders. So we have to think about how are we going to adjust our coaching? Third actors, we've got people staying in organizations longer. We don't have people retiring at 65 or 62 like we used to. We're seeing people work into their 70s. So how are we coaching people in their 70s? What does that mean? Holistic organizations. I'm going to steal something from Robert now, and that is the person in their role, the person in their role in the organization. So it's a system. It's not just the person. How are they interacting with their role? How do they interact with the system we call the organization? How do we coach entrepreneurs? That many people are dropping out of organizations to become entrepreneurs. How are we adjusting our coaching to address their needs? And then finally, she talks about networks and neuroscience and that we're connected, like our brains are connected in terms of how we process information. And our networks of people are connected in terms of how they think and how they process information. So how are we bringing that together? And how are people bringing that information into their way of behaving? So, oh, I didn't pull this one out. My apologies. So this is the opportunities that we have available for us in terms of the future opportunities. And we can tie this back a little bit to what Heidi's saying in terms of, do people understand, does millennials want coaching, but they can't afford it? So they understand the benefits, but how are we going to get that information to them? The ROI metrics, really important. That there's some data coming out now, but we need more. We need improved general perception. There's an increased demand for coaching in all of those areas that Heidi's talking about. How are we going to meet that demand? The media has become positive. However, some of our obstacles come back to what AMA said in terms of untrained individuals. Market saturation, there's a lot of people coaching, and so the market saturation can be a challenge. I think the biggest challenge is for us to be really vigilant in helping buyers of services understand what they're buying, and from both an understanding of the service as well as the pricing. And that the ICF worries about overregulation. I'm not as worried about overregulation because I think that can benefit those of us who have really excelled in the coaching space. So let's see what Stelter has to say. And he talks about that coaching is evolving from first generation, which the roots were in sports, goals and problems. Second generation was rooted in appreciative dialogue, appreciative inquiry, and what are the solutions, which was systemic and social construction theory, which is how do I make meaning from my world? Moving into the person being self-reflexive as a basic condition, and that we accept the client that we are coaching as far as knowing what's best for them, not us knowing what's best for them. So how do we help them become more reflective from a transformative, fruitful, and genuine dialogue. So third generation focuses on meaning making, reflection, and collaborative practice. So now we're asking people how they make meaning. I continue to encounter clients who are coaching others and say that the people they're working with do not understand. Our goal as coaches is to understand the client the way we need to understand them and understand how they're making meaning. I was working with a client yesterday, and the client said one of the things that frustrates him is when people say they understand and then they don't do what they're supposed to do. And I said, how do they make meaning? And so making meaning is going to be a very important part of our future conversations. And in fact, the first conversation in December is going to be on meaning making. So dialogue, focus on values, focus on meaning making, and the narrative collaborative process. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to make this available, but when we get into values, how do we help the person step back from what's going on, emotionally unhook, and create that reflective space that then helps them understand a new worldview? When we think about meaning making, we think about, we understand how we feel, how we think, and how we act. And because of that, we tell stories. And so we now, as coaches, really have to listen to those stories, because it's a collaborative process that we create, that their story is okay. They can craft the story in a different way, but the story they're telling is okay because it fits them right now. The question in coaching then becomes, is this the story you want to continue to tell? Because we've got to be okay with them making the meaning they're making right now, because if we don't, they will not have a felt sense of our coaching with them. If we try to change them so that they fit our meaning, then they will not have this felt sense, which goes back to Boyatzis's work of resonance. And so the idea is to create as much resonance with our clients and expand on that felt sense. And then finally, that we're using those experiences and feelings that people are having so that we can understand them. Stories that are told, listened to, and read become the formation of daily cultural life. If we cannot deconstruct the stories our clients are telling, we cannot help them, because the stories become their reality. The stories become their truth. And if their stories are what are in their way, then we have to help them in that deconstruction process. So what I want to do now is, we're not going to do those questions. We're going to talk a little bit about the main activities of fruitful dialogue, which is, are we listening? Robert said this, it has to be listening. Do we understand what's at stake and what really matters? You know, as I'm coaching people and we ask them what they really value, and Zelda and I had this conversation before we started, you know, in understanding about, you know, performance and values, where do they come together? Why are they performing? What do they care about from a value perspective? And think about going from second generation to third generation as crossing a bridge. We're not going to run across there. There are going to be people that don't want to go there. And we will stay in second generation coaching with some clients. There will be some clients that are already in third generation and want us to be there with them. And so we'll have to determine, based on the people we're coaching, whether this is where we're going to go from that perspective. And identifying what things mean to each one of us and how we're hearing what's happening. Not focusing simply on the goal or the outcome. As Enzig talks about, what is the passion and the purpose? You know, most of our clients have never been asked, what are you most passionate about? What do you think your purpose is? And so now we can start digging into that so that we can build and maintain resonance. So now we have Stelter talking about resonance, and we see the convergence of the authors and where they're coming together and how we can expand our coaching. That there are limits of our question. And so lingering longer as being a sounding board, being a thinking partner. So I'm going to stop right here with the fruitful dialogue. And I'm going to ask Zelda and Ursula to share their thinking about where are the connections between Stelter and Zig in terms of the future of coaching and how we can be more in that space. So Ursula, what are your thoughts?
Hi, thank you for the summary that you gave us on Stelter and Hetty or Heidi. The value and the meaning making and the narrative approach, that belongs to clearly both of them, and them seeking the reflective space. So that's where they both are very similar. In terms of Hetty, her coming from the arts and the history, I think she is also history, where her first degrees were in. She is looking for a very holistic approach, and then she went also into psychology in between. And she is very much in the transpersonal space, which includes the mind, the body, and the spirit. So it's very holistic. Stelter, he's in the reflective space, he's in the dialogue, but the idea of making sense, giving meaning, and tapping into the value system is and reflecting is definitely the strong connection between both of them.
Awesome. And I see that too. And I think, and again, what I'm going to say is that you have a range of clients, and you might even have clients who are at first generation coaching. And so this is not to imply that whoever you're talking to has to be in third generation. This conversation was to help you think about where we're going and when it fits, how we might include it. So Zelda, what are your thoughts?
Yes, thanks, Peggy. It was a lovely foundation that you set, and thanks, Ursula. I totally agree. I think what really impressed me about Stelter is and Anzik is that they talk about purpose. Anzik talks about purpose, and Stelter talks about values. And it's as if we, and it's also meaning making, as if we are the coach and coachee are human beings connecting in a dialogue and for meaning making. What's also struck me about Stelter is where he said that the coach and the coachee are equal thinking partners. So that almost pulls us back, from the original thinking of the coach being neutral to the problem or challenge, and thinking that the solution is in the client. This is really pulling the coach's voice into the conversation as well. So much more broader than just goal setting. We're talking about values, purpose, and I think it's getting closer to the humane approach. I think we also spoke about humane leadership. So I think for me, that's the golden thread.
I think you made a really important point, Zelda, and that is first generation is the coach had all the answers. Second generation was the client had all the answers. And now in third generation, we're talking about the co-creation of the answer together as we create thinking partnerships with people. And so I've had clients say, but what do I do? The people that candidates say to me, but what do I do? Because my clients come to me and they want the answer from me. How do I deal with that? And one of the things I say is that, when you're working with someone who says, well, what do you think? And what's your answer? That it gives you the opportunity to say, well, I do have some ideas, but I want to hear from you first. So you put it back to the client to do the thinking first, and then you add to the thinking. So there's ways to take what we're sharing today and move it forward, in thinking about, are you primarily in first generation? Are you primarily in second generation? Are you ready to move into third generation? Are your clients thinking in that space? And I know we're getting to the top of the hour and we kind of rushed, but I left you in breakout rooms a little bit longer so you could talk. But do you have any questions? What are you thinking about the first, second, and third generation coaching? And if you liked this, we could do a whole session on just Enzig and Stelter and what they're thinking about the changes in coaching, instead of breaking it into Clutterbuck and Boyatzis. We can leave them out and come back and revisit it. But do you have any questions?
Peggy, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What do you do when the client really is in such a bad space that they cannot really think of a solution? They just sit there and say and look at you and say, well, I cannot think. I've tried everything, and so please help me. So what do you do?
So sometimes when people cannot think, Amanda, it's because they are reflective and they need the questions ahead of time. Okay.
Yeah.
So what you can do, Amanda, is say, okay, let's think together. So what if you were giving somebody else advice on the same topic? What advice would you give them? And so you get it outside of them, you can think together, and then you can give an assignment when they leave your coaching to say, okay, I want you to come back with 3 ideas that would fit with what we're addressing right now. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Anything else? So as I end, don't forget to visit our website, because we have a new virtual assistant who is populating it every day. There are 2 new blogs out there. This webinar will be posted. There are thought leadership articles coming out, and visit the faculty that we're talking with you today. So please continue to visit us at both at our website and on LinkedIn. Our next session is 2 weeks from today, and we will be covering work-life integration. So not balance, but integration. So we have a speaker coming to deliver that presentation. I'm super excited about it. So our calls are at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, and then the rest of you have to figure it out. That's as close as I can get. So everyone, have a great weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. And please let us know what your ideas are and if you need anything. Thank you.